My name is Dylan Arredondo.
Dylan Arredondo is a storyteller and theater maker active in DC's theater community. In this performance, Dylan takes us on an exploration of his relationship to his father and their Japanese-Mexican heritage, uncovered through the dessert, mochi.
So, you may or may not be aware of this, but they are beginning to put little mochi freezer buffets in Whole Foods across America. Now, I generally cannot afford to shop at Whole Foods, but I hear that this is something that they're doing. And during a treat yourself weekend a couple of months back, I go and I visit one of these in person. And I was filled with a deep nostalgia. I knew that this wasn't the real thing, that this was some Americanized commercial attempt at mochi. But still, it was in this moment that I realized, and it really struck me, that I associate mochi with home. And for me, home is not a place, home is a group of people. To connect the dots, first I need to introduce you to my dad, Mark. Now, as far as dads go, he's a great guy. He has a comparatively cheery demeanor, easy to build rapport with, expert salesman, someone who really lives for the present moment, but, and I say this with love, someone who generally has a smidge of historical obliviousness. And despite being the mixed-race son of Japanese and Mexican immigrants, I conceive of him as the whitest person I know. A man of extremely white pronunciations despite his physical appearance. We're talking tortilla status here, let alone his last name, Arredondo. And that was his relationship to his culture. I had no idea why he was the way he was, and as someone who truly wanted to proudly experience and immerse myself in and take ownership of the culture that ran through my veins, I began to attach a lot of shame to my dad. But back to mochi. Mochi is all about texture. It's smooth, sticky, elastic, chewy. To achieve this, one must conduct the mochi pounding. So think about how taffy has those rotating bars that stretch it. Mochi is pounded. And when I think about why my dad is the way he is, I often revisit this image of pounding as an image of assimilation. His father was constantly trying to erase his Mexicanness when trying to fit in amongst the Japanese family. His mother was trying to erase her Japaneseness when trying to fit in amongst the Mexican family. Both were just trying their hardest to not be outsiders. And if that meant, hey, pounding out a little piece of who you intrinsically were in order to avoid being alienated for marrying someone who was outside the community, maybe it was a price worth paying. My dad was never taught Spanish or Japanese because it was believed that immersing him in English would make him a more successful American later in life. And it becomes clear that my father's ignorance may have been a byproduct of my grandparents, my great-grandparents' conscientiousness. But the story begins when my dad gets a call from a distant cousin saying, hey, we're getting the band back together. Mochi Day. It's happening at the farm. Jump cut to 48 hours later. Now, Mochi Day in 4 images. 1. Walking to a house at the end of a road of a citrus orchard, a few acres of the orchard that apparently my family had picked for almost 100 years. 2. Handmade, homemade sushi and onigiri alongside the Arizona cuisine staples of enchiladas and beer. Food on every kitchen surface. No one would be leaving with an empty stomach, that was clear. 3. The aunties all gathered on the couch, my grandma Ayoko sitting amidst them, laughing among themselves. And 4. Tables powdered with flour as far as the eye could see, with every able-bodied child and adult pounding mochi. Now, I had met the aunties before offhand at weddings and funerals, but never gathered all at once. And when I had met them before, they had always been mostly silent, and rarely, if ever, smiled. And I don't just mean silence in conversation, I also mean silent regarding their histories. But for some reason here, surrounded by culture for the first time in years, decades even, they finally gave themselves permission to open up. They call over my dad. Hey, child, we got a story to tell you. It's the story of Tomi, your Oba-chan. You'll have to tune in next episode for the epic oral history that then ensued, but I'll give you the cliff notes, aka why Tomi Nakatsu, my great-grandmother, was a total badass. 1, she came to the States as a picture bride. 2, she survived Japanese internment. 3, she was a single female Japanese business owner only 7 years after the end of World War II. She got shit done. So I'm in the corner riding the roller coaster of this, overhearing it, and I'd like to say that I looked at my dad for the first time in my life and saw him cry a single tear that ran down his cheek. But that wasn't the case. He nodded, he took it all in, he thanked the aunties, but from that moment on, I saw a shift in my dad, this kind of big picture shift, a big picture choice to buy into his culture. And then We made mochi together, with all the aunties teaching us how, pounding the mochi. But instead of desperately trying to rid ourselves of our Japaneseness, now we were desperately trying to relearn, remember, reclaim our ness. Instead of allowing yourself to be the cultural product of your ancestors' choices, you make the choice for yourself to reconnect to the culture in your blood, on your palate. Because ultimately, I'm learning this connection, that is home.
My name is Dylan Arredondo. For me, what makes being an artist in the DC area different than other cities, I think, across the country is that this environment is not one of competition, it's one of community. I really do think that people want to lift one another up in this city. And that's why I love to make work in this city. I was brought to the DC metro area by way of a national tour. I took a national tour out of Olney, Maryland. We rehearsed there, and a lot of the directors and designers worked in the DC area. So when we came back, I ended up taking an offer here in DC, and it was supposed to sort of be temporary. I was going to scoot back up to New York thereafter, but one contract led to more, and it's sort of been this cycle. And I think that that's something that's only possible in a community-led or community-focused space. I was inspired to make this piece because I think it's an interesting thing to kind of live in the in-between as a mixed-race individual, as a person with kind of multiple cultural heritages, and figuring out how to navigate that as neither an insider or really an outsider in any one of those communities. So I feel like this piece is the beginning of me trying to reckon with what that means and what is mixed race privilege and things like that. I mean, I think creating during a pandemic is healing, hopefully for all. Hopefully it's healing for the audience who may be hungry to consume. And certainly I can speak from my own experience, it's healing for the artist, right? You're kind of finding the locus, the loci in your body of where you're holding joy, where you're holding trauma, where you're holding pain right now, and where you're holding suffering, and working through that and reckoning with that through your art. So I think it's vital to be creating in the middle of any crisis.